Okay, let's get underway. Thanks for coming to our midweek Bible class. Welcome, everybody. Let's just remain seated and we'll approach God. Okay, well, we'll hand over.
I'll just do a short reading, maybe just do Daniel 11, verse 40 to the end. Maybe.
Right.
I'll normally ask Benji to read
this.
Thank you for that, Benji. And hi, everyone who's on the Zoom. And hi, everybody here. Now, I was going to call it a review of 2022, but I've just called it a prophecy update because there were so many different things from different angles that I couldn't really even properly call it a review of 22. And look, there'll be a few different things that we'll have a look at. And so many different areas of prophecy, but we'll just focus on a few. The first one that I thought we'd have a look at, now there's a lot we could say about Israel, but as you probably know, there's been a change of government. Now, I must say, where that actually leads, we'll have to wait and see. But now it looks like Mr. Netanyahu is building a government in the land of Israel. He's come back after only a very short time away. Now, what I do find quite fascinating about Netanyahu is that he does have does seem to have had a friendly relationship with Vladimir Putin. I find that quite interesting, given the fact that Israel has sort of been treading a very fine line on the issue of Ukraine. But I'm going to play now. I think the videos won't play out of the computer. Sorry, out of the PowerPoint. Alt tab, is it? Alt. Yep. Alt tab. Wow, where is the tab? Oh, yep. Alt tab, and that gets me. Oh, yep. Oh, yep. Oh, right. Yeah, never done that. Yeah. So, yeah, I'll just yeah. So normally I'll just go into here. Oh, I've lost. Yeah, I've lost my folder. So it won't be a tick. Sorry about this. We just got to improvise a little bit here with. I'll play those afterwards. So, yeah. So Netanyahu.
Today,
got some sound. So that's good. So here we go now.
Today, we received a tremendous vote of confidence from the citizens of Israel. It became clear once again that the Likud is the largest party in Israel by a significant margin, above all other parties. And it must point out that our partners in the national camp won very impressive achievements. I talked to them, I greeted them, well done to them. I'm a bit experienced. I've been in several election campaigns. So I can tell you that we still have to wait for the true results. But one thing is already clear, that our way has proven itself.
Anyway, so that we've seen in Israel a change in government. So we'll have to wait and see what actually happens there. But I do find that quite fascinating. The fact that he's been such a survivor for such a long period of time. And the other thing I find quite fascinating too is that he is very close to a man who has a very close relationship with Christadelphians and has done for a long period of time, which is the former ambassador of Australia. I find that fascinating as well, that Mr. Yuval Rotem, who's been in Australia, he's spoken at various events like Bible School and Heritage College, and he's a very close associate of Mr. Netanyahu. So Mr. Netanyahu would have a good understanding, I believe, of what Christadelphians believe. I'm sure that's the case because I know that Christadelphians have had quite an impact on Mr. Rotem over the years. So just all very interesting. And I think, of course, what we do know is that God has a purpose for the Jews, and God will do whatever he can to bring them to the point where they'll accept Christ. Now, we've got this situation which I want to have a chat about. This is really something you could spend a whole night on in a lot of ways, or about 5 nights on, is the revolutions that are occurring around the world. Now, we know that there were revolutions about 10 or 12 years ago in the Middle East, particularly in the countries where there was a revolution was Egypt and Libya. They overthrew the governments. But this is something that really is going worldwide. It's not just in the Middle East. I mean, back in the 90s, we had revolutions in Europe. Then it spread to the Middle East, and now it is starting to spread to the whole world. Now, does anyone know where that picture is? That's another revolution. It's like a revolution, really. Yeah, believe it or not, it's actually Canada, which is, you'd never believe that you'd have that situation in Canada. That's in February of this year. Now, while it's not really a revolution, it's actually the first time in 50 years that the government had to did invoke, whether they had to or not, up as part of an investigation at the moment, but did it actually invoke the Emergencies Act as a state of emergency to try to clear the protesters. So this is what's happening. That's just a snapshot of two examples. Does anyone know what this is? Why we've got pictures of people in a swimming pool here? That's it, Sri Lanka. Have you ever swum in that swimming pool? No, so that's the presidential palace, and of course the people took over the palace. So there's, if you have a look, Brother Fran is just up there. Yeah, look. He's also just in the middle there, Yeah. Now, why would we present that? What interest is that? I mean, has Sri Lanka and Canada got any interest apart from? Yes, that's right. Yeah. Why would we be interested in that? I mean, I can understand why we'd be interested in revolution, say, in the Middle East, because it changes the face of the whole Middle East.
It's fear and madness from the French Revolution, sweeping the world up its feet. It's a remote, insignificant little place. It's still effective.
Yeah, exactly. Now we know. Yep. That's in Sri Lanka, and there's heaps of countries actually like that. Now how do I hide that top fourth one down? My IT experts have got me sorted. Brilliant. So this is, as you've said, the unclean spirits like frogs, which is revolution and anarchy. Now we know that because it says that the frog-like spirits are demoniacal, and it says in James chapter 3, it says that the demoniacal spirit is revolution and anarchy. That's the meaning of the words. It's not in the King James Version. That the meaning of I forget what the wording is. It's something like unrest, strife. The wording is revolution and anarchy, right? So the spirit of frogs, it's like legion. It's madness, and it works miracles going forth to the kings of the earth and to the whole world to gather them to the great day of God Almighty. That's the final sign as far as the book of Revelation is concerned before the return of Christ. And I'm saying it in accord, as far as the book of Revelation is concerned, it's the last sign spoken of before the coming of Christ. Now, we know that there's some pictures from the Middle East. In fact, that one I think is in Greece, back about 10 years ago. These ones here are from Middle Eastern countries, whether it's Libya, that might be Algeria possibly. And one commentator back at the time said, when people lose everything, they have nothing less to lose, and they lose it. That, to me, summarises what's going on here. Now, why do you think this would be the last great sign? There's no one particular answer to this. Why would this be? Why does this have to be the one last sign before the return of Christ, at least as far as Revelation is concerned? Is it just like, oh, there we go, Bible prophecy is fulfilling? That's good. How about that?
Well, if you link it to Luke 21, you're seeing the waves roaring.
Yes, correct. Yep.
Here are the people who are the seeing waves roaring. They're out of control. There's no control.
Yep.
It's actually the opposite to what is coming.
Correct. Absolutely. That's correct as well. Absolutely.
And what these spirits are doing, governments are working with them. The left wing, the woke is promoting a lot of this stuff. And basically, Revelation gives the answer. It says they are gathering, causing the nations to be gathered to the great day of God Almighty.
Yeah.
Last step. This is the last.
And the next verse says, behold, I come as a thief.
That's
So
good. Good.
it's very distractionary to the whole world.
Yes. Exactly. So, look, I think the answer for me, one of the main reasons is that the world is being prepared for Christ, and the world is not so. First of all, it says the spirit of the frogs comes out of the mouth. The mouth is like the government of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Now that occurred really mainly in the early 90s, late 89, when the European Union. Well, the Berlin Wall fell, which meant that Europe was able to unite. It then resulted in the Maastricht Treaty, so it resulted in the uniting of Europe, particularly even stronger. It also resulted in the fall of the communist government in Russia, which resulted in a religious government, a Russian Orthodox government. We had it out of the mouth of the false prophet because that was the Pope involved with the revolutions in Poland. Now, at the time, we said, here's the frog-like spirit. And probably what we didn't think about was we thought, well, yeah, it says out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. But then the next bit says, and to the kings of the earth, and to the whole world. You sort of just read that without really thinking that much about it. We saw it go to the kings of the earth, particularly when we've seen, like even when Donald Trump was elected, it was a billionaire elected by blue-collar workers who were suffering under the previous government. But not only you had that as an example, but you also had these revolutions in the Middle East. Now, what that's created in the Middle East is a whole changed Middle East. It caused, even though the government held on to power in Syria, it brought Russia in to Syria, and Russia's still there with a strong presence today. It brought the fall of Libya and really Egypt to make those countries very weak and vulnerable for Russian forces. There's a lot of Russian forces in those countries today. So you've got the Middle East dramatically affected. You've also got countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, all concerned about their future, so they're more aligning with Israel. So again, there's a frog spirits seem to be manipulating and changing the whole course of everything perfectly for Armageddon. And then you've got the move to the whole world. Now, I think we're yet to really see the full effect. It's only just started, really. And one of the big things about that, when it goes to the whole world, there's that quote in James, by the way. Earthly, yeah, the one at the bottom, that's the Wisdom version. That one there, James 3, earthly, unspiritual, demoniac, same word as in Revelation 16. For where jealousy and selfish ambition is, there will be disorder and every vile practice. King James Version says confusion. Vine says that word disorder means anarchy and revolution. I've quoted the ESV there. Some of you will be familiar with this confusion. It means anarchy and revolution. Now, people understand this when the Wizard of Id is there and the croaking of the frogs, and he says, the king here says, do something about the frogs. And the guard says, they're not frogs, they're the peasants, they're rising up. So there's so much you could say about this, and particularly what we've seen in the pandemic, what has happened as a result of the pandemic, or at least government policies from the pandemic, is it's widened the gap between the rich and the poor dramatically. I think there's about 500 million people went into poverty who weren't previously in poverty during the pandemic, and the richest people in the world got multiple times richer than they ever were before, and tens of thousands of billionaires were created during the pandemic as the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. So again, what's being prepared, someone said it was the opposite to what the kingdom of God is. This is what's happening in the world. There's a divide between rich and poor dramatically, and it's exponentially going that way. The rich people are taking control. The poor people are just got no say whatsoever. And the rich people think, we got it all covered. These people are going to be our slaves. We've got everything sorted. And that's not the case. They're going to rise up. And that will create, I believe, a situation where people will accept Jesus. The poor people, particularly, will respond to Christ in a positive way, remembering that the saints will go out to the world and the saints will actually go to the world to preach the gospel to these people. Now, the elite that want to take control of the world are not going to want to have their power taken away. But a lot of the poor people, significant amount of the poor people, no doubt will be the ones who will respond, particularly those who are really under. Yeah.
Politics and social pressure. And in fact, people have no alternative. And what Aloka is finding in Sri Lanka is wherever she goes, people want to talk to her about the gospel.
So here, this is it's it. So
they want to talk about the truth as well.
Well, there's an example. So you can see how the spirit of the frogs. Doesn't matter whether you look at Russia, Europe, and the papacy, whether you look at the Middle East, whether you look at the whole world. It's all a part of gathering the nations for Armageddon to bring about the return of Christ and bring about that whole scenario.
Right, Andrew, about the distinction between the rules of, I guess, the rich and the poor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's almost like quoting Psalm 2, where it's the king of the earth.
That's it.
Who oppose Christ. Even though he set up a kingdom, the saints are there. The rules, the kings of the earth, they set themselves and they counsel together. How can we do away with this?
That's a good point. That's very interesting, isn't it? The kings of the earth. Yeah, it is. So, look, there's so much. And again, Exodus 8, of course, people in the world, and look, a lot of these people who are rising up, we're not sort of criticising them and saying, the fact is, these people have got nothing else, they've got nothing left. They've got nothing left at all. They've got no one to turn to. They don't know what to do. So they rise up. They end up in the swimming pool or it's got them all lying on the bed of the king of the president of Sri Lanka, and he bolted for the border while the people took over the palace. So this is a French revolutionary spirit. And that's why, like a lot of people, where there's been criticism of our understanding of Revelation, is they say, there's all this stuff in Revelation 16 about the French Revolution and the aftermath of that. That doesn't have any relationship to what's going on today at all. It doesn't make any sense. Like, why have you got the 6 vial as a continuation of that? The point is, that's what it's all about. This is all about a spirit of madness that came from the French Revolution. It's an overall theme of that chapter that will bring about the return of Christ. Now, a couple of it, what we'll do is I think I've got... Now, look, there's a picture there. Does anyone know what that one is? I think it's Melbourne, from what I'm aware. Now, that's a protest last year. I think it's in November of last year in Melbourne, which was the biggest protest gathering, or biggest gathering of people, at least for a protest, in the history of Victoria. In fact, I think it's the history of Australia, possibly. Certainly Victoria, it was the biggest one ever. It was double the size of the Vietnam protest, and that's the people going up against the government. So you've got this, story that it's a worldwide story. Now let's have a look at this. I'm going to use Alt Tab and look at that. Alt Tab, eh? Yep.
Is like, well, you got stuck in about 18th century and the very Euro-centric Melbourne like that. So how come your interpretation of why was stuck back in John Thomas was at the time? I'm like,
yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? So and that's exactly. Yeah. And you look at the world today. And you say that the big, and it's going to happen more and more, particularly if there's a financial crisis, that the world's going to be in a completely different situation of what we've seen for a long time, and it's going to shock everyone. I'm just going to play a little video from. This relates to Sri Lanka and other countries.
History about to repeat itself. Look around you. Developing countries the world over are struggling with a sovereign debt crisis. One of them has already succumbed. Sri Lanka. Its economy has collapsed, ballooning debt and shrinking foreign reserves. There isn't enough money to pay for basic necessities. Of course, this crisis is of Sri Lanka's own making. The Rajapaksas mismanaged the finances. They spent more than the national income. They allowed deep tax cuts and destroyed the economy. But the world did not help. Look at the global factors at play: the pandemic-induced slowdown, the growing cost of borrowing, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has increased food and fuel prices. These factors compounded the Lankan crisis, and they still persist. The fear is that the Lankan crisis could mutate. Experts say Colombo is just the canary in the coal mine. More countries are set to fall. The entire developing world is at risk. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. On the 15th of February, exactly 9 days before Russia invaded Ukraine, the World Bank issued a warning. Developing nations face a looming debt crisis. The World Bank named 70 countries, 70 low and middle income countries facing debt repayments worth $11 billion. The report said this burden could crush their economies in 2022. 9 days later, Russia invaded Ukraine. The invasion disrupted supply chains, it threw financial markets into disarray, and triggered a global oil crisis. The economic forecasts became darker and starker. In March, the United Nations released this report. It said there were 107 economies that face at least one of the three risks. Number one, rising food prices. Number two, rising energy prices. And three, tougher financial conditions. 107 countries face these risks. Together, they represent 1.7 billion people. That's more than 1/5 of humanity. There are 69 countries that face all the three risks: food, energy, finance, all three. 69 countries could go the Sri Lanka way. 25 in Africa, 25 in the Asia Pacific, and 19 in Latin America. Which countries are these? We'll start with Egypt, the land of pharaohs. It is in the throes of a financial crisis. Egypt is the world's largest importer of wheat. Russia and Ukraine were its top suppliers. As they fight now, the supplies are running out. Last month, Egypt said that its wheat reserves will not last more than 3 months. Next, we have Tunisia, the birthplace of the Arab Spring. Its economy is overheating. Foreign debt accounts for 100% of its GDP. The trade deficit has widened to $800 million. Inflation stands at 7%. Fuel prices at record highs. Experts say Tunisia could soon face civil unrest. The same warning has been issued for Lebanon, the Switzerland of West Asia. Well, not anymore. In 2020, the Beirut blasts destroyed Lebanon's largest grain stores. Food prices went up by 11 times. The Lebanese pound lost 90% of its value. Public debt grew to 360% of the GDP. The war in Ukraine complicated things further. Lebanon imported 80% of its wheat from Ukraine. Those supplies have fallen. There's a bread shortage, a scarcity of sunflower oil. Lebanon has been forced to take a $150 million loan from the World Bank to ensure food security. Then we have Argentina.
All right, so she goes on and quotes a whole lot of different countries and shows how that this is becoming a worldwide problem. Now, that's the next thing. And again, this is you could do a whole night on this to show that the world is very much on the verge of a debt crisis, or there is a debt crisis there. They're just trying to pump money into the system and borrow more money to try to cover it up. There already is a debt crisis, and there has been really for 10 years. You could talk about the United States as just this country, which is, if it was a company, it would have been declared bankrupt a decade ago. But what this debt crisis is doing, it's fueling this whole spirit where people are going to just rise up. Now, the thing I really want to say, I suppose, tonight is that we look at the world today and events happening in the world and even in Australia through the lens of what we can see happening today, where the economy's, chugging along. Okay, people complain, of course, the interest rates are going up and there's squeezing everyone and all this sort of stuff. That might be true, but they're very minor things, really, relatively. We see the world, but, at a time of relative prosperity. You have a financial crash an uprising of populations against their government all over the world is a completely different place. If you see the fall of the government in, say, Turkey, you have a financial collapse in Turkey. What's the latest inflation rate there? I think it's someone said 80%. Someone said more than 100. It's huge. The inflation rate's like almost 100%, and it's gone up. When we were there about 4 years ago, I was shocked when people said it was 20. Now it's latest I heard was 80, and someone said it was over 100. So you see that the government could fall very easily in these countries, and the whole world will be a different place. Suddenly everything's changed. And like domino, that's right. And people go, oh, price can't come yet because, I don't reckon this can happen and this. People make all sorts of comments like that. They've got no idea that overnight you could find the whole world is a different place.
Just like COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. completely change everything. So the one thing I would say, we're not here to predict what's going to happen next with Ukraine or Israel. We just got to watch and keep an eye on what's happening and be alert to what's going on. But the one mistake I think people can make is by saying, oh, I've looked at events in the world and I think Christ can't come for decades yet because there's all these other things that have got to happen. I'm like, well, who are you to say that? Like, things could be changed dramatically, but very quickly, that we never envisaged. And all we can see is the general push towards that. It's more than a push. It's just it's going flat out towards that end result. Now, this is the one you'll find this interesting. You would never think a place like Canada this could happen. Have a look at what happens here. These are people rising up against in a time of prosperity.
Those who refuse will have to pay a new health contribution.
Sont extrémistes, qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi.
We have one of the biggest revolutions happening. Right now there's 50,000 truckers and about 1.4 million people headed to the Parliament in Ottawa, and they're going to stay there until Trudeau resigns or they give us back all of our freedoms and rights.
Every overpass is packed with Canadians. Look at this right here. Look at this. God bless Canada. God bless every single one of you truckers, and every single one of you Canadians that are supporting this movement. This is not a fringe. We will not be divided.
So, I mean, none of that was really presented on the news, but you can sort of see that the amount of people involved is huge.
Where I was giving up on Canada, and you guys are giving me hope. You guys are giving us strength. You guys are keeping us going. And wow, we are one big team, one big national team. The entire world is watching us. I firmly believe this is our last stand, and we are not coming home until you are all free.
What a moment in Canadian history! I love you, Canada!
A small fringe minority holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians.
In the last 6 years, Trudeau has changed the face of this.
Okay, so that gives you a little idea of what's going on in an obscure, it's a big country, but never before has been any of this sort of thing. We've never seen this sort of thing in countries like Canada or Australia. That was in February of this year. Now, a lot of you probably wouldn't never have seen any of that footage because it wasn't on the news, so the news didn't show any of that, right? That's right. Yeah, so very extreme lockdowns. That's right. So a lot of that you wouldn't have seen, just like you wouldn't have seen the protests in Melbourne as well, because it was, of course, the media is in control, but people know what's going on. And again, the rise of social media, that's what actually caused the revolution in Egypt. The revolution in Egypt and Libya was caused because of social media. They were able to send out, whether it was WhatsApp or Facebook, whatever it was. I think it was Facebook. Facebook message, there were groups on Facebook, and they say, revolution occurring in 1 hour's time in the main square, and bang, millions of people suddenly got there, which in the past never had the opportunity to do that. But suddenly there were new technologies which were able to bring millions of people suddenly to a place to protest that it never. You try and organise 1 million people to turn up in the main square in the city, in the past. You couldn't do it. Social media changed everything. So that's how it happened in Sri Lanka, was it as well? Yeah.
That's how the populace, all populace,
Yeah.
in poverty, no strength at all. So social media, suddenly they'll protest hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. So there's a look, and a lot more we could say about that, and particularly about the global elite and the fact that all these leaders, it's interesting that you'll see that all these leaders are following a common pattern, whether it be Dan Andrews or Ardern in New Zealand or not so sure, don't know much about Albanese, but I know certainly Trudeau. They're all products of the World Economic Forum. Again, it's the rich rising up in control of the poor. Now, we've seen in previous studies, particularly with the young people, the fact that many scriptures, and this is now jumping onto events happening in Great Britain, that we know that Great Britain's future destiny is with Israel. We've seen that Brexit has caused a breaking away from the European scene by Great Britain. And those scriptures there, whether it's the daughter of Tyre and the ships of Tarshish there, speak of the British power and the young lions. Now we have a new Prime Minister in Britain, and it's just interesting that there's an Israeli news site that says that he is the UK Prime Minister now. He's a strong friend of Israel, and the Israeli media back in October reported about the fact that he's spoken at Conservative Friends of Israel gatherings. He's an Indian. He's recognised Jerusalem as Israel's historic capital and has supported Liz Truss. Now, Liz Truss is over here. She was in there for a short time. It made a few blunders on the financial thing. But she was the lady she was the foreign minister who signed the deal here. This was 1 year ago. She signed the deal with Israel to protect. Does anyone know what that deal was she signed as a foreign minister? It's quite an important deal. And it was next Wednesday it'll be exactly a year since she signed it. Yeah, so part of it was a trade deal. Definitely it was a trade. Part of it was a trade deal. But one of the things she specifically signed, and it was signed on Hanukkah, the day of Hanukkah, and Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister, gave a Hanukkah speech about the importance of Hanukkah. But the deal that was signed was that Britain committed to support Israel militarily for the next 10 years. So that means that the Battle of Armageddon is that Britain has got a deal with Israel that they will be there to protect. So that's why Tarshish and the young lions say, why do you come to take a spoil? Why are you coming? They're there. Then they'll be hopelessly outsmarted. I won't read all of that there, but he's described Israel as a shining beacon of hope. He's very much been involved with the Holocaust remembrance and a whole lot of other issues to do with Israel. We've seen more with the young people's class, a couple of classes that a few have done this year, about the fact that the death of the Queen was quite significant in the fact that monarch, as Isaiah 23 said, at the end of 70 years, Yahweh will visit Tyre. And everywhere you look, all over the headlines everywhere, was 70 years, 70 years, 70 years. And Great Britain celebrated her 70th anniversary on the throne. It was celebrated, I think it was in, I know the 6th of February was 70 years, when 70 years was up. And the celebrations, I think, were in June, because that was they had a special long weekend to celebrate it. And within a few months, she had passed away. But as it says in Isaiah 23, verse 17, what does it say there? What happens at the end of 70 years? Yep. So she'll be in a state at the end of the 70 years of the reign of a monarch, and we're talking about Isaiah 23 is, you've got to say, well, what's the subject? The chapter is about the burden of Tyre, and it says, the burden of Tyre, howl ye ships of Tarshish. Now we know that the latter day Tyre is Tarshish, and there's a whole lot of ways which you go and show that. But, well, Isaiah 23 itself actually says, pass ye over to Tarshish, howl ye inhabitants of the isle. So it's saying that the ancient trading power of Tyre, which was a worldwide trading power, would pass over to Tarshish and would be, so Tarshish in the latter days will be there as the latter day Tyre. So the power, the trading merchant power of Tyre will pass over and become Tarshish. And that's why that quote there says the daughter of Tyre will be there with a gift. Psalm 72 says the kings of Tarshish and of the isles shall bring presents, because they're one and the same thing. Whether we call her Tyre, or a good way to describe her is the daughter of Tyre, because she's Tyre, but in the same family as Tyre. She was the latter-day Tyre. And in Ezekiel 38, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof. The isles, or the young lions, there are always with Tarshish. And also, not only that, Sheba and Seba, which is the area of Saudi Arabia. Now, fascinating there that at the death, that when the Queen died, this double rainbow appeared over the top of Buckingham Palace. We know that historically Sheba and Dedan are in that area of Saudi Arabia, and it goes back to Genesis 25, where Abraham took a wife whose name is Keturah, who had those children, and Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. So they were descendants of Keturah and Abraham. And we looked at those quotes earlier. We won't really go into the detail of that. Well, there's that quote there that I read out before. That Britain is the latter day, I'll skip those there. Britain's the latter day Tyre, or as we call Tarshish. And it says, I mean, my question before was what happens at the end of the 70 years? Well, it says, Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. And that word for king is a monarch. It can be male or female. After the end of 70 years shall Tyre sing as a harlot. Now, the point you say, well, that seems a bit weird. But what it's saying is that Britain is trading with other nations in a state of ungodliness. That's the symbology that's used. So at the end of 70 years, Britain goes to trade with other nations all around the world, but does so not from godly motives. It's purely to make money. But at the end of 70 years, in verse 17, it says, Yahweh will visit Tyre, and she shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. So what Britain does at the end of the 70 years is she decides, not in a godly way, but just to make money, to trade with all nations spread across the earth. Now, what's caused Britain to do that? Financial crisis? Brexit, that's right. Now, isn't it amazing that Brexit occurred? You think it's by chance that Brexit actually went through? In fact, the trade deal went through literally only 12 months, 13 months before the end of the 70 years. Perfect timing, so that Britain could then sign trade deals. So you've got headlines like that. Brexit Britain could form a new superpower with Australia, Canada and New Zealand. The Kanzuk Alliance idea makes waves with the Indo-Pacific. You've got Israel was actually the first country back in 2019, the first country to finalise post-Brexit trade deals with the UK. I think New Zealand was the second. Now, this is something that's up to date. This is a headline from today. Now, recently at G20, is it a photo maybe taken at the G20 or something very recently, that this was ratified by the Parliament today, a UK-Australian free trade deal. That was ratified in the Parliament today. Sorry? I believe so, yeah. Not sure about that. I saw it about 10 minutes before coming in. Did a bit of a cut and paste. And that's in Albanese's, if you follow him on whatever that is that Twitter or something? Yep. Now, we know that Great Britain will be separate from Catholic Europe at the time when Christ comes to set up the kingdom. And those countries there, those European countries, will be on opposite sides Great Britain. And you'll see Saudi Arabia and the Arab nations with Britain. Now, there's a headline there. We'll just read a few of these headlines, really. Suddenly, Prince Mohammed bin Salman has become the acceptable despot the UK must cozy up to. That was back in March. And so, again, all these, we know they're in an ungodly state, because people often say, oh, yeah, but they're not doing this in a godly way. They're not doing this because they're following God. They're just after money, or they're after security or whatever. Well, that's true. That's why it says she'll sing as a harlot. She's doing this for financial gain, and so is Saudi Arabia. But the thing is this is all a preparation again for the kingdom. It's a preparation, particularly with those Abraham Accords, a preparation for the Arabs and the Jews to be together at the time of the return of Christ, so that when Christ comes, the Arabs will be inclined to accept Jesus Christ and the preaching of the saints. Now, we know that we did a session with the young people where we looked at Joel chapter 3, that many scriptures speak of the fact that the first phase of God's judgment is the wheat harvest. And can anyone think of another quote any other quotes that are not mentioned there that speak of a wheat harvest? Scripturally? Yep, wheat and the tares, yep. Yep. Yep, Ruth and Boaz.
Putting the sickle to harvest is right.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. So that's actually Joel 3. When I asked that question, I didn't see Joel 3 under number 1, but of course it's right above it. Joel 3, put you in the sickle. So it's interesting that quote. What's the next thing? Put you in the sickle for the harvest is right. What's the next thing it says?
Wake up in the morning.
Not but it's Joel 3 specific. Put ye in the sickle for the harvest is right. Number 1. Go get ye down for the vats overflow. Number 2. Jamin knew it, he just didn't want to say it. That's the grape harvest. The press is full, the vats overthrow. There it is. That's Joel 3. Very specific, exact. And if you go to Revelation 14, it's the same. The wheat harvest first, the grape harvest second, just like it is in nature. The wheat harvest is first, then the grape harvest. The Battle of Armageddon is predominantly a military invasion by Eastern powers, Russia and other countries around that area, Iran, with support from Europe and the papacy. But the main fight from the papacy and from Europe is the second phase of God's judgment, which is the grape harvest. Now, I know we're getting close to finishing soon. We might just look at a few of these headlines here. This is at the beginning of it's actually at the end of last year, but that headline there in the Sydney Morning Herald really summarises what the world could very well be facing very soon, and that is that the US can't win 2 wars at once, Joe Biden's worst nightmare. And that is that if China actually makes a move against Taiwan or any other countries, the Americans could be forced to again, they'll be forced into a situation that's not there now. Now, we're looking at now and we're going, oh, everyone's fighting a war in Ukraine. Well, that might be the case, but what happens if there's another war? I mean, the war in Ukraine happened, so who's to say there's not going to be this war again with China? So the whole world could be completely different in a year's time, or else even tomorrow. Now, as we've seen the war in Ukraine, there's a few headlines there. This was from earlier in the year, the Soviet pipeline that keeps Europe hooked on Moscow's oil. This has been a huge problem this year, is that Russia invaded Ukraine and suddenly they found, European countries, particularly Germany, found that they suddenly couldn't just disconnect themselves to Russia, because, I mean, you could force Roman Abramovich to sell Chelsea Football Club. I mean, that took a few months. You could force him out and say, get out of England. That's fine, but what about turning off the electricity, turning off the energy to Russia, and people start freezing? That's a bit harder. Boycott of Russian gas and oil could cause mass poverty in Germany. So there's been this major problem of Germany and Russia being so closely linked. Now, somebody did say they wanted to see Donald Trump, so here we go. Well, I know you've got to have Donald Trump in there somewhere. So let's have a look at this by popular demand. This is
with Russia
5 years ago.
Where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. So we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting all of these countries. And then numerous of the countries go out and make a pipeline deal with Russia where they're paying billions of dollars into the coffers of Russia. So we're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia. And I think that's very inappropriate. And the former chancellor of Germany is the head of the pipeline company that's supplying the gas.
That's Schroeder.
Ultimately, Germany will have almost 70% of their country controlled by Russia with natural gas. So you tell me, is that appropriate? I mean, I've been complaining about this from the time I got in. It should have never been allowed to have happened. But Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened. And I think we have to talk to Germany about it. On top of that, Germany is just paying a little bit over 1%, whereas the United States, in actual numbers, is paying 4.2% of a much larger GDP. So I think that's inappropriate also. You know, we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting everybody, and yet we're paying a lot of money to protect. Now, this has been going on for decades.
So there you go.
This
So
has
that
been brought up by other presidents, but other presidents never did anything.
So there you go. So you wanted a good one. So there's a good one. So isn't that a classic? He's exactly what Donald Trump was saying. You're so tightly controlled by Russia, you can't get out of it. And that's 2016. So yes, it's well, he does. He just says, you know exactly what he's talking about. You can see it. Now, of course, Putin invaded Ukraine, and the headlines at the time said this sort of thing, that his invasion of Ukraine is not just a war of politics, it's a holy war. And now where the war in Ukraine leads to, it's hard to tell which way it'll go. The only thing I would say, though, is I think you'll find that what Russia has learned from this conflict in Ukraine is that they do not want to be going further east. Russia will want to go south. That's where Russia's got west. Yeah, did I say east? Yeah, I said east. Yeah, they won't. Now, this is what happened in various battles in history. Adolf Hitler went into Russia. That was not his role to be successful. He got repelled. Napoleon, any time he went out of Europe, he was repelled, but he was successful in Europe. And so I think with Putin, that it's not really his role to penetrate any further into Europe. But we know that he has a lot of forces in Egypt, Libya, Syria, and other areas in the Middle East. And that scripturally, his role will be to move, whether it's Putin or another successor of him, Russia's role will be to move into the Middle East. And yeah.
Sometimes about the understanding of Article 38.
Yeah.
And how it will make up that Chief Prince of Meshach and Tubal is stretched to make it Prince of Rosh, Meshach and Tubal. But if you ever read that article, I see Ezekiel 38 right there. It says it in the second bottom line, Prince of Rosh. So this Prince of Rosh that we apply now is not a new expression. It applied to Prince Vladimir, the leader of the Kievan Rus in the 10th century, as it says. And he was known as the Prince of Rosh.
And even the name Rosh means the head, which is the head of the serpent. And it was Sisera's head that was crushed by a woman, which is typical of the bride of Christ. It also says in Habakkuk 3 that he'll strike the head, and the word is Rosh. So whether it's a proper noun or not, doesn't matter. It's the head of the serpent. And Gog is of the land of Magog. And it's so easy to show that Gog is north of the Black Sea. Wherever you want to maybe put it, north of the Black Sea is where Gog come from. Now, that's where Russia is today. It's pretty straightforward. But this is really probably what I want to really finish on now, is the fact that in the last few months, and again, it's not sort of readily apparent in the main sort of media, or maybe you have seen it, but that Russia, Iran, and Turkey have been very much working together over the last few months. And you'll see just by these headlines, Putin's trying to build a new axis of autocrats. And he's devoting considerable time and energy into fostering a new axis of autocrats, bringing Moscow into an ever tighter collaboration with China, North Korea, and Iran. And it's so this is another headline. Russia is forming an alliance of pariah states in the Middle East. It might put Israel in an awkward situation in Syria. So it's a grave new challenge not only to Israel, but to the United States. Meanwhile, this revolutionary spirit has resulted in mass protests in Iran. And it was sparked by that woman's death there, who was a death in police custody. And again, so you've got massive unrest in Iran. Now, this is showing us that the world could change very quickly once the financial system collapses. Now, you imagine, for instance, a very simple change could be that if the internet goes down, and that could happen very easily, a few missiles into the cables off the coast of Great Britain somewhere. Years ago, there was a front page news article, front page of the Australian, the whole front page was about the potential of Russia to knock out the world's internet. You imagine if the internet goes down, the whole world's financial system will collapse. The whole world will be different. It will be a changed place. And look what's happening. All around, everywhere, you're seeing revolutions. Even in Iran, you never would have expected one there. Now, Iran and Russia are cementing an alliance with grain, drones, and satellites. A lot of these articles seem to be talking about grain and wheat. I find that quite fascinating too. And a lot of them to do with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So again, it's all saying the same thing. These drones, there are thousands of drones that Russia is now using in Ukraine, and they're all Iranian drones. And there's a few of the explosions that have happened in Ukraine from these drones. I think they not only drop bombs so much, but they're like kamikaze drones that they're like bombs in themselves, but they fly like aeroplanes. Not only that, but Iran and Russia moved to a global natural gas cartel. So there's a very close alliance there now between, in more and more in the last few months with Iran. Now, when it talks about Iran's deepening military expansion into Europe, it's talking about their alliance with Russia. And it says it represents an alarming expansion in Iran's military ambitions beyond the Middle East. But again, it's by using Russia. Of course, Russia's put themselves in a situation where Mr. Putin said this is not a bluff, saying in remarks viewed on the world stage as a threat on the possible use of nuclear weapons. Now, I don't know if any nuclear weapons will be used or not. Scripturally, it's hard to say. There's an indication maybe in Zechariah 14 that they may be set off. One thing's for sure, the world will not be destroyed, but whatever the case is, there's some pretty bad things going to happen. One nuclear bomb would change the whole world. The world would be completely changed. Now, something like that might even happen once the states are taken. May not, but we know that it'll be the time of trouble such as never was. There's going to be a time of crisis for the world.
They've taken out a nuclear power station in Ukraine, haven't they, just recently?
Yeah, so it's
which in itself is a timeline.
It's a really, yeah, it's a real fine line. This is really the last slide here. And this, we don't often hear a lot about Greece, but Greece has warned of a Ukraine-style war with Turkey in the East Mediterranean. I think Russia's alliance with Turkey is a very much an uneasy alliance. More than uneasy is a very mild term. It's one that Russia and Turkey are using just for their own benefit. They really hate each other, and they hate each other historically. They do, and Russia has got bases in Turkey. They've had a conflict, and Greece really hates the Turks. I think Russia and Turkey have got common enemies. You often hear of these countries having alliances with one another, and then you think, well, hang on, like Turkey has an alliance with Iran, but then they're trying to get on well with Israel, and Israel's trying to get on well with countries that are aligned with Iran, who's their main enemy. What's actually going on here? So a lot of these alliances are all just for convenience, and it could very easily change in a flash. But this is the sort of example of the sort of thing that can happen. Greece said the region risks falling into war, similar as what was seen in Ukraine after Turkey raised the spectre of military action against its neighbour. They've had disputes for decades. In fact, it's hundreds of years, actually. Hundreds of years. I think back into the early 1800s, there was a major war between Turkey and Greece. And we know, of course, that Russia and the Orthodox Church, which includes Greece, will take Istanbul, take control, whether it's it may not be by a military invasion. It could well just be by the fact that the government in Turkey falls. There's a financial crash, which is imminent, and they'll just walk in and take the place. I think that's what will really happen. So I think really the thing I think we've seen with the world is how incredibly fragile the world is, and that God's kingdom on earth is the only hope for our world. And Revelation 21 says that God will wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. For the former things are passed away. And he that sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful.